Okay, I think it's time to get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. A very warm welcome to you all today. My name is Pauline Colligan-Geneva, and I have the pleasure to host this public webinar on women and mining on behalf of Fair Finance International. I am accompanied today by my colleague Case Code, the project lead for Fair Finance International, and we are hosting this event with the support of Oxfam, Surge, Securing Indigenous People's Rights in the Green Economy Coalition, and Fair Finance Bolivia and Fair Finance Peru, for which we are very grateful. Mining, and specifically mining for critical minerals, is quickly becoming a 21st century gold rush with massive implications for geopolitics, the climate crisis, the clean energy transition, but also for those communities where the mines are. At the end of 2025, Fair Finance International published a report entitled Financing Critical Minerals but Failing Critical Safeguards, which exposed how Europe's banks and investors are investing in mining companies linked to land grabs, pollution, and human rights violations. The report analyses the 8 largest EU banks and investors on their environmental and human rights safeguards and includes country case studies linked to 4 mining operations in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mozambique, Brazil, and Peru. Today's event connects to that report but puts the spotlight firmly on women, how mining practices specifically affect women, along with the economic, social, and physical consequences for women in areas impacted by mining. We will also look at how investors and financial institutions can engage better on this topic and use their influence to support responsible and equitable mining practices. We are extremely proud and privileged to host a fantastic panel of speakers with us today, with rich knowledge and experience to share. However, before we dive in, I would like to alert you to one small change and to some housekeeping rules. Firstly, unfortunately, we have a slight change to our panel as due to adverse weather conditions, our speaker Mariska has been unable to join from South Africa. She has, however, very kindly provided us with a presentation, and her colleague Leslie is going to present on her behalf and answer questions. So we are very grateful to Leslie for stepping in, and we are very, it's unfortunate that we cannot have Mariska with us today, but she is very apologetic. Otherwise, important to note that this meeting is being recorded and will be made publicly available. So if you would prefer not to be seen, please keep your camera off. The meeting, as said before, has simultaneous English-Spanish translation. So if you need to access the language you wish to listen in, there is a button at the end of the screen called interpretation. Just select the language you wish to listen in. Otherwise, each speaker will have about 8 minutes to present, and we will take all questions at the end of the inputs. So you can put your questions in the chat, but we will address them at the end of all of the presentations. So, without further ado, I think it's time to jump into the substance of today's webinar. Our first speaker today is Cynthia Navarro of Oxfam Peru. Cynthia is a Program Officer of Economic and Social Justice at Oxfam in Peru. She holds a master's degree in social investment management from the Universidad del Pacífico. She has over 13 years of experience in government, civil society, and academia in the design, implementation, advising, and advocacy of public policies. So without any further ado, I hand the floor over to you, Cynthia. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Pauline. Buenos días con todos, con todas. Es un placer estar aquí para compartir el estudio que hemos realizado en Oxfam en Perú. El estudio es Mujeres en tiempos de transición energética. Es un estudio que publicamos en marzo del año pasado, del 2025. Y es un trabajo que se inspira en la Plataforma Nacional de Personas Afectadas por Metales Pesados. Y queremos aquí, el estudio pues analiza los costos de la exposición a metales pesados. Solamente para confirmar, Pauline, si logran ver el PPT.
Yes, that was okay, Cynthia. We could see.
Okay.
It's now gone, however. Yes, that's back again.
Genial. El estudio analiza los costos de la exposición a metales pesados vinculados a los costos relacionados a la salud y al trabajo de cuidados en un periodo de tiempo entre el 2015 y el 2023. La meta climática global de transición energética se sostiene sobre la extracción de minerales. La producción de vehículos que funcionan en electricidad necesitan el cobre, las energías renovables necesitan minerales como el zinc y el cobre. El Banco Mundial ha estimado que se necesitan más de 3 billones de toneladas de minerales y metales para garantizar la meta de transición energética. Esto implica un incremento de la demanda global de minerales y, por tanto, una profundización de la extracción de minerales en los territorios donde de estos se extraen. En el caso peruano es el tercer productor, el mayor productor de cobre en el mundo y el segundo con las mayores reservas de cobre. Se ha estimado que entre el 50 y el 80% de estos minerales se encuentran en el territorio de poblaciones indígenas, por lo tanto es importante analizar cuáles son las consecuencias o los efectos de esta demanda de minerales sobre los territorios de poblaciones indígenas, rurales y especialmente en la vida de las mujeres. En el Perú, 1 de cada 3 personas está en riesgo de exposición a metales pesados y, por tanto, en riesgo de desarrollar enfermedades crónicas. Cómo esto se conecta cuando hablamos de exposición a metales pesados, cómo está conectado con la actividad minera, pues la contaminación ambiental de una mala práctica minera constituye una fuente de exposición a metales pesados. Estos metales pesados o metaloides son, por ejemplo, el plomo, el cadmio, el arsénico. Niveles elevados de estos metales y metaloides en el cuerpo de las poblaciones que viven en las zonas de influencia minera tienen múltiples consecuencias y diferentes impactos. Hay una alta probabilidad del desarrollo de enfermedades crónicas, a mayor presencia de estos metales en la sangre de las personas. Algunas o muchas de estas enfermedades crónicas llegan a ser discapacitantes. Al mismo tiempo se habla de efectos diferenciados. En el caso de las mujeres y los niños son poblaciones de mayor riesgo. En un estudio desarrollado por Derechos Humanos Sin Fronteras, una ONG nacional, encontró casos de aborto espontáneo e infertilidad de mujeres del ámbito de las actividades mineras. Las mujeres no solamente experimentan estas afectaciones a su salud, sino además asumen el trabajo de cuidados, que implica, por ejemplo, para las familias, tener a un familiar con alguna enfermedad crónica derivada por una alta presencia de metales pesados y metaloides en su organismo, en un contexto además donde la densidad estatal o la presencia del Estado en los territorios donde se extraen estos recursos no es la mejor. Hay una precaria infraestructura sanitaria. Algunas mujeres deben cargar a sus familiares enfermos para acceder a una posta de salud a pie porque tampoco hay silla de ruedas y por tanto deben caminar alrededor de 4 horas para acceder a salud. Entonces, en un contexto de mayor incremento de la demanda de minerales, profundiza la extracción de estos minerales en territorios indígenas y, por tanto, tiene consecuencias en la salud ambiental, en la salud humana y, por tanto, hay una relación estrecha en el incremento del trabajo de cuidados que asumen las mujeres. El estudio analiza los costos a la salud. Ustedes lo pueden revisar con profundidad en el estudio. Para efectos de esta presentación solamente vamos a enfatizar los hallazgos vinculados a las horas de trabajo de cuidados. Por ejemplo, en los hogares con familiares altamente dependientes, las mujeres llegan a destinar cerca de 50 horas a la semana en el trabajo de cuidados. Estos números se incrementan en el caso de mujeres rurales, que llegan a destinar más de 55 horas a la semana. Y este tiempo se incrementa, por ejemplo, en el caso de los hogares donde hay la jefatura del hogar es asumida por las mujeres, que llegan a destinar el 85.3% del tiempo requerido para los cuidados de familiares altamente dependientes. Hablar del trabajo de cuidados no solamente implica una estimación del tiempo, de las horas que se destinan a esto, sino lo que significa en términos de las trayectorias profesionales, educacionales y también las relaciones o las consecuencias a la salud mental. En un estudio de Derechos Humanos Sin Fronteras encontró, por ejemplo, que el 75% de las mujeres expuestas a metales pesados que participaron en el estudio fueron diagnosticadas de depresión y esta depresión estaba asociada a preocupaciones a la salud, a su propia salud, a la salud de sus familiares y también a la capacidad económica que no tendrían para asumir los costos de la atención en salud de estos familiares. Es importante poner en el centro de la discusión de transición energética y de la demanda de minerales denominados críticos a las mujeres y especialmente a las mujeres rurales, a las mujeres indígenas, en virtud de también los beneficios que está recibiendo la actividad a razón, por ejemplo, de los precios internacionales de los minerales. Es importante tener una discusión económica también sobre estos efectos y estos impactos. En una estimación realizada por Cooperación, por ejemplo, los ingresos extraordinarios entre el 2020 y 2023 se calcularon en más de 42 billones de dólares. Y en el 2023, por ejemplo, el porcentaje del total de impuestos del país que representaron los impuestos que asumió el sector minero solamente representó el 9.7%. Entonces, en un superciclo de precios internacionales, la contribución en términos de impuestos del sector minero no es suficiente, a razón de que además estos recursos no logran tampoco llegar a las poblaciones. En el 2025 el presupuesto público o el gobierno asignó en el presupuesto público 2 soles, es decir, menos de $1 por persona expuesta a metales pesados para recibir atención en salud. Son muchas las reflexiones que podemos tener en términos de la política pública. Es importante entender la naturaleza del derecho al cuidado en su interdependencia con la garantía de otros derechos. Y en ese caso, cómo se resuelve, por ejemplo, la infraestructura pública de salud para generar las condiciones o mejores condiciones para el trabajo de cuidados no remunerado que asumen las mujeres indígenas en entornos, por ejemplo, como el peruano, donde la capacidad resolutiva de los establecimientos de salud de comunidades nativas llegan al nivel 1, esto es, establecimientos de salud donde no tienen medicamentos, al menos hay solamente un personal de salud y tampoco los equipos para atender enfermedades de alta complejidad como son las enfermedades crónicas. En muchos casos, por ejemplo, pueden derivarse situaciones de cáncer, entonces el acceso a los servicios de salud no está garantizada para la población afectada o con riesgo de exposición a metales pesados. Cuando hablamos de cuidados también hablamos de una corresponsabilidad, la responsabilidad compartida que debe ser asumida también el Estado en garantizar justamente esta infraestructura para el trabajo de cuidados en políticas ad hoc o políticas específicas para la población a mayor riesgo como son las mujeres y los niños. Y al mismo tiempo revertir las condiciones que justamente incrementan los riesgos de exposición como es la contaminación ambiental, remediar las áreas impactadas y, por supuesto, garantizar la institucionalidad ambiental para garantizar las acciones de monitoreo y fiscalización de las prácticas ambientales. Cuando hablamos de transición energética justa, hablamos de garantizar las condiciones para las comunidades rurales, las comunidades indígenas y especialmente para las mujeres. El cumplimiento de los estándares internacionales de los actores en la cadena de suministro global de minerales, la aplicación de la debida diligencia y también cuando reflexionamos sobre los minerales o cómo estos agudizan o profundizan los impactos en los territorios, es importante también tener una perspectiva histórica de lo que ha pasado y de las consecuencias de la actividad y, por tanto, avanzar hacia mecanismos de reparación para las mujeres que han sostenido la vida en contextos de extracción de minerales. Quiero invitarles a revisar nuestro estudio, pueden profundizar muchos de los elementos que he podido compartir ahora. Ese es el QR para el estudio que está en español e inglés en la web de Oxfam en Perú. Y también queremos invitarles a ver el video Kawaii, es un video grabado en quechua, y nos cuenta la historia de Graciela, una mujer también afectada por la presencia de arsénico en su cuerpo y cómo esto agudiza los trabajos de cuidado que asume en su comunidad. El video está en inglés y en español y ha contado también con el apoyo de Derechos Humanos Sin Fronteras y Cooperación. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. Thank you for that really important look at the physical and mental health impacts for those, and particularly those women in affected areas. I will move us along now to our next speaker, who is Graciela Cespedes. And Graciela is the president of the Central Indigenous Women's Organization of La Paz, Bolivia, which is an organization that brings together 11 women's organizations in the La Paz Amazon region. It is also part of the Central Indigenous Peoples Organization of La Paz and the Peasant and Indigenous Bloc of the Northern Amazon of Bolivia. Graciela has actually traveled for 8 hours to join us, to be able to join us in this webinar. So I want to express our sincere appreciation for Graciela, for her being with us today. We are very grateful to have her voice in this space. I give the floor to you, Graciela.
Muchas gracias. Primeramente, muy buenos días a todas las que están participando en esta conferencia. Es muy importante para nosotras, las mujeres indígenas. Quien les habla, Graciela Céspedes, de Bolivia. Yo vivo en un pueblo ancestral, pueblo Leco, que está ubicada en el norte amazónico de Bolivia. Soy la presidenta de la Central de Mujeres Indígenas del Norte de La Paz, en la cual nosotros abarcamos 11 territorios que estamos allá ubicados. Bueno, es muy triste escuchar, ¿no? El testimonio que dijo la compañera. La verdad, el testimonio es muy triste para nosotras las mujeres, especialmente para mí como mujer indígena que yo participo, ¿no? De allá, de nuestros territorios, a partir más o menos cuando nos ha afectado ya la minería. La minería está ahorita en su auge, ¿no? Las personas se dedican más a la minería. Entonces nosotros como pueblos indígenas estamos sufriendo a partir del 2000 para adelante, más o menos. Del 2000 para atrás nosotros vivíamos felices, ¿no? Con nuestros territorios sanos, nuestras aguas cristalinas, nuestros peces, nuestros animales, que nosotros y nuestra biodiversidad sana, sin ningún problema. Entonces, a partir del 2000 para adelante ya llegaron, ¿no? Las cooperativas, las empresas, las maquinarias que han empezado a usar y también nos han empezado, ¿no? A avasallar a las comunidades. Como ustedes ven, abrieron tremendos pozos para poder adquirir el mineral. Así están en el momento nuestras comunidades, nuestros ríos están afectados. Ya no es lo mismo, ¿no? Como estaba más antes. Nosotros ya no podemos ni pescar, no podemos ni comer esos peces porque también están contaminados. En el tema del combustible, como también el mercurio. El mercurio es el metal más peligroso que existe ahorita que estamos utilizando que están utilizando nuestros hermanos mineros. También más abajo, ¿no? Aquí ven, como están viendo, esas dragas, enormes dragas les llaman, son dragas extranjeras que han entrado a nuestros ríos, como ser los chinos, los colombianos y algunos otros, los brasileros, han venido a nuestros territorios en busca del oro. Y mire cómo lo ven, esas tremendas dragas que están dragando nuestros ríos y lo están moviendo, ¿no? No solamente ahí, sino lo desvían el río, lo llevan para allá, para el otro lado, lo mueven a donde ellos quieren. Entonces, eso es lo que ha ocasionado también lo que ha derribado nuestras comunidades. Los escombros se ha ido llenando los ríos y entonces nos han afectado nuestra producción, se ha ido llevando y las comunidades enteras han desaparecido por causa de ese movimiento que ha habido, ¿no? En el tema de las maquinarias. Y también en cada tiempo de lluvia nosotros sufrimos inundaciones, perdemos nuestras casas, perdemos nuestra producción y tantas cosas, ¿no? Que el mercurio también nos afecta. Estamos contaminados, ríos abajo, hay territorios que están allá nuestros hermanos, que todavía ellos no tienen agua entubada, como dicen, ¿no? Agua potable difícil que tengamos. Nuestros hermanos todavía beben esa agua. De lo que están viendo ustedes, el río baja para abajo a otros territorios, entonces nuestros hermanos están bebiendo esa agua. Entonces no tienen ellos. Y también están comiendo, ¿no? Los peces que hay en ese río porque están contaminados también, porque se ha hecho un estudio donde los hermanos tienen mercurio en su cuerpo. Entonces, eso es lo que está ocasionando a nosotros, especialmente a las mujeres, ¿no? Quienes sufrimos ese tipo de enfermedades ocasionadas en mujeres embarazadas, niños. Hay niños que están naciendo con dificultades, con defectos, mujeres que también no pueden tener sus bebés normalmente. Mayormente se van a los médicos y ahí no hay médicos, ¿no? Tenemos que llevarlos a los centros de salud muy alejados. Nuestros caminos, nuestra salud está muy abandonada. Nosotros como pueblos indígenas sufrimos eso vulneración, sufrimos ese abandono de parte del gobierno. Entonces, es eso que estamos sufriendo y también nuestros hermanos no pueden salir afuera porque están ahí también, ellos no tienen otro trabajo, no se meten a trabajar ahí. Como ya no hay la caza ni la pesca de que puedan vivir, entonces nuestros hermanos se ponen a trabajar. Son empresas grandes que vienen otras personas y luego ellos tienen que trabajar también para ellos, ¿no? Son explotados también en el tema económico, en el tema social. Más que todo nuestras niñas corren ese peligro. Hay muchas violaciones en nuestros niños, embarazos no deseados. Entonces, todas esas cosas nos ha ocasionado la minería, nosotras como pueblos indígenas. De esa manera que algunas otros pueblos se han declarado libres de minería, ¿no? No permiten que la minería ingrese a otros territorios, pero sin embargo, hay otros territorios que ya están totalmente, ¿no? Acabados y ya están entrando también ya a plataformas, como ya no hay ríos, entonces están ya entrando a plataformas para poder derribar nuestros bosques. Nuestros bosques ya se están erosionando por falta de árboles, también la deforestación, todo eso nos está afectando bastante. A nuestros caminos a veces no tenemos acceso para poder ir a los pueblos, las comunidades, estamos ahí sin transitabilidad para poder salir a hacer nuestras compras, a ir a médicos, todo eso, ¿no? Entonces, eso es lo que está ocasionando mayormente las mujeres y los niños y las personas de la tercera edad sufrimos todo eso. Eso es lo que está pasando en Bolivia, en nuestro sector del norte amazónico. Como ustedes pueden ver, las personas se dedican más a la minería. Ha ido cambiando la vida social, ¿no? Los compañeros, los hermanos indígenas se han vuelto mineros. ¿Por qué? Porque no hay también otra fuente de ingreso donde se podría trabajar. Solo es la minería, pero cuando viene el tiempo de lluvia en estas épocas, entonces donde más se sufre, ¿no? El tema de trabajo. Eso es lo que nosotros sufrimos por causa de la minería, los efectos de la minería en nuestros pueblos indígenas. ¿Qué pasa con el gobierno? El gobierno es el que no cumple, ¿no? Con el tema de las normativas, las leyes. nosotros como pueblos indígenas tenemos que ser consultados para poder que esas cooperativas, empresas ingresen a nuestros territorios, pero sin embargo no pasa eso, ¿no? En las empresas llegan y nos derriban sin hacernos la consulta, porque nosotros somos pueblos ancestrales que hemos vivido ahí toda la vida, hemos nacido ahí con territorio, tenemos nuestra propia cultura, nuestros principios, pero sin embargo, ¿qué hizo, no? El gobierno nos ha derribado, nos ha vulnerado nuestros derechos como pueblos indígenas, no ha respetado nuestros territorios, han, han solicitado, han beneficiado a empresas grandes, empresas extranjeras que nos han derribado nuestros territorios. ¿Qué pasa? Han facilitado permiso, un permiso que da el gobierno para que ellos puedan trabajar en nuestros territorios. Entonces, eso es lo que ha pasado con nuestra. ¿Y qué podemos hacer? Nosotros, lo que nosotros pedimos al gobierno, yo sé que la minería no se va a terminar, va a seguir la minería, sigue creciendo. Los hermanos de otros se han declarado libres, pero siguen creciendo, siguen yendo, ¿no? Ahí a esos lugares para poder eh, avasallar. O sea, ellos van, avasallan sin ningún permiso, sin ninguna consulta, lo meten las maquinarias y ya. Entonces, eso es lo que estamos sufriendo como pueblos indígenas. Nosotros somos organizaciones de mujeres que estamos 11 organizaciones de mujeres que estamos luchando contra la minería, ¿no? Las hermanas y también nosotros estamos organizadas, somos 11 organizaciones que estamos en el norte de La Paz y sufrimos eso, ¿no? Pedimos también brigadas al gobierno, brigadas de médicos, para que vayan y también nos vayan a hacer diagnósticos para que puedan llegar a esas comunidades alejadas donde no llegan centros de salud. Nuestras hermanas están contaminadas con el mercurio. Eso es lo que pedimos al gobierno, que haya brigadas de médicos para que vayan y hagan esa revisión, porque sufren bastante, bastante realmente. Y es muy bueno, ¿no? En este momento para poder eh, decir todo lo que vivimos nosotros como mujeres indígenas, como pueblos del norte de La Paz. Muchas gracias por darme este espacio para hacer conocer. Realmente para nosotros es una ayuda y para hacer visible todo lo que nosotros estamos sufriendo como pueblos indígenas. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Graciela, and for this very important first-hand testimony of the impacts of mining on your community. I'm now going to turn the focus a little bit to another part of the world. Our next presentation is from Mariska Joseph. As mentioned earlier, unfortunately, due to weather conditions, Mariska's internet connection has prevented her from being able to join us today. But she had already made her presentation, and so thankfully we have her presentation, and we also have her colleague Leslie here, who is going to present on behalf of Mariska, and will also be here to answer questions. But to give you still the background on Mariska, she is an Indigenous Nama youth representative from Richtersveld in South Africa. She is a second-year student at UNISA studying accounting science, and she is involved in the Indigenous Peoples of Africa Coordinating Committee as a community mobilizer. As I said, unfortunately, she is not here, but I'm now going to hand over the floor to Leslie, who will present on her behalf. Thank you very much, Leslie.
Thank you so much, Pauline. And we all keep Mariska in our memory because she's got an important, also in terms of her studies, commitments today that she has to, an important test. So I will do my best to read her presentation. Guide says our Ge. My name is Mariska, and I share the experiences of the indigenous Nama people in the mining industry in South Africa. And I am located as part of the Nama people located in the Kubus area. And the Kubus area, next slide, is found in the northern province of South Africa. And this is really the story of the community that has been impacted by diamond mining. In terms of the Nama community where Mariska is from, in terms of the Nama traditional governance, the Kubus Nama culture, land and pride, which is Kubus, is one of the towns located in the Northern Cape province of South Africa. It is an area exceptionally rich in natural resources such as diamonds, gold, copper, lithium, tungsten, and several rare earth elements. It is also considered the only arid biodiversity hotspot with its wealth of plants. Next slide. We have 3,500 households in our 6 towns in the Richtersveld Nama communities, and we as the Nama people are one of the oldest surviving culture-rich nation attached to our values and culture up until today. And their presence runs across South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana. Historically, our people used to mine gold from the topsoil until they were removed from their territories. And today we make a living from mostly small-scale farming with goats. Historically, it was cattle and sheep that enabled us to take care of our families and our community. Women have sold traditional clothes and foods to tourists in the past and still today to earn income, but also on a small scale due to limited opportunities. Next slide. Alex Core, RMC JV, which is the state-owned mining companies, diamond mining operations have dispossessed our people from their historical lands and territories during the 1930s. And our people were sold the lie that Alex Core's mining operations were supposed to transform Richtersveld into a beautiful story and to make hearts rejoice and alleviate poverty in our towns and improve our living conditions. Our community has been deprived of a narrow strip of diamond-rich land along the west coast of the Northern Cape in Richtersveld, and the expropriation took place after diamonds were discovered, after which mining rights were awarded to Alex Core, a state-owned mining company, since the 1930s. In 1996, the Nama community sought land restitution before our land court under the Post-Apartheid Restitution of Land Rights Act. And our people were successful in securing a court order that won back our indigenous lands as well as the subsurface mineral resources. This was a very important case in situations where prospecting or mining rights are granted in respect of land that has been subjected to a land claim. Our 2003 Constitutional Court case victory for the Nama peoples that developed around the issue of Richtersveld confirms that expropriation of land includes the expropriation of rights to the mineral resources of the land, and that restitution in terms of our Restitution of Land Rights Act of 1994 can therefore include the restitution of the right to minerals as subsurface resource rights. The importance of this particular case is that it affirms that the Land Claims Court, by making such an order for restoration of indigenous land and or equitable redress, is therefore compelling the defendant to compensate the indigenous land claimant for environmental damage to our land, to repair environmental damage caused to our soil, and the court further affirmed that our indigenous laws are of equal importance and force as formal law. However, 18 years plus later, our indigenous people are still sitting without any meaningful benefits stemming from this 2003 Land Restitution Court decision. A joint venture initiative was formed between Alex Core Mining Company and the Nama community representatives. While the court ordered 100% ownership to the Nama indigenous people. A deed of settlement a year later was agreed to, whereby a joint venture company was formed with a mining company and certain Nama indigenous individuals represented via the Communal Property Association. And the deed of settlement was to be the implementation of this 2003 court decision. There has since been an elite capture from the Communal Property Association since the Richtersveld communities became 49% shareholders at the Alex Core RMC joint venture and the community became 49% shareholder, and the Alex Core RMC mining company became 51% shareholder through the deed of settlement. Yet the community won 100% of their lands and resources back. For 18 years, we as the landowners have not benefited from our shares of even 49%. Currently, there is another court case underway to address the concerns and unhappiness of us as Richtersveld Nama communities, and also to hold the Alex Core mining company responsible for this deed of settlement that was signed, but no meaningful beneficiation happened even 18 years later. Alex Core RMC mining company continues to fail our people, of which women are integral to the 3,500 households. The people who live near the mines' living conditions, in particular those women, the living conditions are quite challenging. The aftermath of the long-standing mining operations is still being felt, especially by our women. There are minimal opportunities created for the women by the mining company. Some of the legacy mining effects are winds blowing that sometimes blocks the entrances to their homes, and the sand and dust contributes to health concerns. Next slide. Some of our challenges includes failing deed of settlement that does not serve the community's interests. Notwithstanding the great court victory, 18 years later, our communities are facing challenges, amongst others, polluted air, loss of their ancestral land, no access or beneficiation from their diamond mining or any other critical minerals that are planned, legacy tailings that cause dam breaks over time is also a big contributor to the extreme dust and sand in extreme windy conditions. Some of our other challenges include lack of implementation and access to mineral rights, lack of recognition as Indigenous landowners, no proper, free, prior, informed consent is applied with respect to our appropriate rules as documented and found by the court in our 2003 Constitutional Court decision. We face environmental pressures such as droughts and biodiversity loss. A green hydrogen project has been announced by our state that would deny community access to age-old court-awarded Indigenous land. Women are not granted equal access to benefit from the mining industry. Next slide. After 18 years, the Nama original plaintiffs began to organize themselves into their own Nama Biocultural Community Protocol as referenced in the Convention of Biodiversity's Nagoya Protocol. Next slide. So our community policy outlines, so our BCP is regarded as our community policy, and it outlines their consent and how it's obtained. It outlines their relationship with their natural resources, particularly their minerals, as well as their marine resources. The Biocultural Community Protocol of the Nama people of Richtersveld, South Africa, was developed by our Nama Indigenous community of Richtersveld to ensure that our traditional knowledge and our biocultural resources includes our Indigenous laws, affirms our culture, our language, protects our biodiversity, and ensure that we can be consulted and give the necessary free, prior, informed consent pertaining the commercialization of our mineral resources, and that it is respected and protected. We would like to use our biocultural community protocol to help bring about dialogue with the relevant external actors, including the Alex Core Mining Company, other potential investors, our state, as well as all other relevant structures. We train our women and youth around the biocultural community protocol and the related legal matters thereto. This will be an important step in starting to salvage what was given to us more than 18 years ago in the famous 2003 Richtersveld Constitutional Court decision. We would also like to invite new investors in line with our BCP to the table, hear and listen to the cries and distress from the youth and women of the Richtersveld communities. Gans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Mariska. And I think this is a really interesting initiative, the Biocultural Community Protocol, and I think we probably will have some further questions and discussions around that in due course. But for now, I'm going to move us on to our fourth speaker of the day, who is Evelyn Roman Escobar. And Evelyn is a policy lead at the SURGE Coalition, where she advocates for the recognition and protection of Indigenous people's rights in EU policies and at the international level, with a particular focus on energy transition mining. She is also a researcher at Ghent University in Belgium, specializing in social life cycle impact assessments. And I will now hand the floor and the word over to you, Evelyn. Welcome.
Alin Punchai. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning and good evening for some of you. Thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to participate in this conversation together with these amazing women leaders. My name is Siblings, just as Pauline has said, and our coalition advocates for the rights of Indigenous peoples. And when it comes to transition mineral supply chains, we focus on the need to operationalize the right to free, prior, and informed consent. We see the energy transition as a huge risk for Indigenous people, just as Graciela said, but also as an opportunity to to change the way in which the mining industry interacts with Indigenous peoples, and to change the mineral supply chain to one that respects Indigenous people's rights, respect consent, and respect the self-determination of Indigenous peoples. Next slide, please. Indigenous peoples are central to the energy transition. Many of you know, or maybe don't know, globally, 54% of minerals necessary for the green technologies and 65% of copper are located near or on Indigenous peoples' territories. And that is probably an underestimation because in many countries and regions, Indigenous peoples are not recognized as such. But these lands, please keep in mind, these lands are not host only to minerals, but also cultures, biodiversity that is essential for planetary resilience, for combating climate change, for food security. Unfortunately, what we see is that the demand for transition minerals is increasing the impacts on Indigenous peoples, particularly women. And just as Graciela has referred, it's getting worse by the day. And I want to here make a side note, because we are talking about transition minerals, right? Critical minerals, transition minerals. But what we see in real is that the demand for minerals includes other sectors like artificial intelligence, aerospace, defense, more and more. So we end up pushing for mining in the name of the energy transition, but actually there is no guarantee that this will be used for clean technologies. Next slide, please. Sadly, projects are going ahead without respecting Indigenous people's rights. And when Indigenous people's leaders speak out, just as we have seen in this meeting, when when they protest, that creates systemic risks. It creates reputational risks, legal risks, political risks, operational risks. This is material. This slide, what you see is the list produced by E&Y, Ernst & Young, pointing to the top 10 risks for the mining industry for the last 3 years. And you find ESGs, you find capital, you find the social license to operate prominently in this list. Next slide, please. As an illustration of what this means, we can see, for example, that the Norwegian pension funds has divested money from the French miner Eramet. And this was related to human rights violations, indigenous people's rights violations in the Halmahera in Indonesia, particularly the Hongana Maniawa indigenous peoples in voluntary isolation. Next slide, please. If we go closer in time, you will find last week indigenous peoples and allies from the Sami people in Norway protesting against the copper mine, the Nusir project, a mine that would discharge millions of tons of mining waste into the Repa fjord, and it would undermine the cultural survival of the Sami community. Our youth leaders, many of them women, and their allies protested in Geneva, in New York, in Melbourne, in Helsinki, in Hamburg. This is global, and this is not an exception. Unfortunately, we see mining and other developments go ahead too often without the consent of indigenous peoples, and conflicts begin, and this creates systemic risks. Next slide, please. Indigenous peoples are not only stakeholders, we are rights holders. And our rights are enshrined in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which provides a global framework for our rights. It's endorsed by all nations, and the declaration recognizes indigenous peoples' rights to self-determination, to lands, to territories and resources, and to participate in decisions that affect indigenous peoples. Next slide, please. At the core of the declaration, we find FPIC, which is the right to free, prior, and informed consent, which is grounded on the indigenous people's rights to self-determination. And it affirms that indigenous people's leaders have the capacity and the right to articulate not only economic priorities, but also cultural priorities, environmental priorities, spiritual priorities, social priorities. And when we talk to companies, investors, policymakers at different levels, we explain that for indigenous peoples, a social license to operate cannot be obtained or maintained without FPIC. You cannot separate one from the other. And I want to clarify here that consent is not equal to consultation. Consultation is not consent. What we want and what is our right is consent. Next slide, please. If we are going to address the climate crisis, we must address the legacy of colonization, and FPIC is a way. And we need to recognize that although many names have been circulating, sustainable mining, green mining, development mining to tie it to the SDGs, the truth is that the mining industry did not really go through a radical change yet. I want to make here a side note, because a clear framework cannot be replaced by voluntary standards. And I'm referring to the declaration of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It cannot be replaced by voluntary standards, although voluntary standards can be helpful if they are fully aligned with the declaration, Take, for example, the Consolidated Mining Standard Initiative, the CMSI, that is now in progress. Emily is going to talk a bit more about it. But I just want to say that in its current state, it does not ensure the respect for indigenous people's rights. So it is not fit for purpose to avoid material risks. So when it comes to mining, the good thing is that we know the playbook. And what we know is that women are first impacted. One of the most devastating impacts of the extractive economy, whether oil, gas, or mining, is the epidemic of missing and murdered indigenous women. What we see repeatedly is that when extractive industries move into indigenous communities, they bring large numbers of outside workers. And this influx of predominantly men is associated with documented increase in violent crime, human trafficking, sexual violence, prostitution, alcohol, and I could go on and on. But at the same time, we see that indigenous women are excluded from the economic benefits of mining. And what we see is that when gender is mentioned in the discussion, the solution is to propose more jobs for women, especially the technical level type of jobs. But that's not a solution. The solution is simply increasing the rights of indigenous peoples, not increasing the spaces or jobs for women, although that's part of the equation. The real issue should be ensuring the rights of indigenous peoples, the community well-being, and the safety of women integrally. Indigenous women are frequently excluded also from decision making, very obviously. They are not at the table when decisions are being made, and we need to be there. We need to go over that dribble. Next slide, please, my last slide. And I want to highlight this point. We are not coming from a place of victimhood. Indigenous women are often living community, organizing, advocating. They are raising international awareness, making efforts to protect the territories, the cultures, the future generations. And indigenous women are often the first to speak when the lands, the waters, the territories are threatened. But at the same time, this leadership is peaceful, it's innovative, and it's highly strategic. We create a solidarity network. You will find women with children marching for days to protect their territories, laying on the roads in front of bulldozers and other types of confrontational but pacific protest. But sadly, because of their leadership and visibility, indigenous women defenders are often specifically targeted with threats, violence, intimidation, criminalization. They simply disappear, or their families. At this moment, as we speak, for example, Daria Ejerba, the co-chair of the International People's Forum on Climate Change, is imprisoned, accused for terrorism by the Russian government because of her advocacy work. We are being criminalized. And last year at the Business and Human Rights Forum, I met a leader. We were in a meeting, and she said, I'm so afraid. Yesterday, we had a meeting with mining companies. I didn't know they were going to be there, and they saw me. I'm afraid of coming back home. And many leaders that go 1 year, they don't go the next year because the state or the companies make them disappear. So we need to defend our defenders. And we need, and I will close with this point, we need to be critical as to how much minerals we really need, because demand is driving pressure on indigenous people's territories. For what we need these minerals? Is it for clean energy, or is it for defense, military, weapons, war? And who decides? Is indigenous peoples from where the minerals are coming, or someone in a desk with other interests that is deciding? I will leave it there. Thank you so much. Ancha Agredesheki.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. You've touched off so many important topics there that need space and time for a lot more discussion. But I think one thing that struck me is that this webinar panel reinforces one thing you said, which was that women are not passive. Women are leading the resistance. And I think we can see that also here today. I'm now going to head over to our final speaker. But before I do so, just to flag that we are hoping to have time for questions and answers at the end of Emily's presentation. But due to time constraints, it may be useful for people to already think of those questions and put them in the chat. And then after, once Emily has completed her presentation, then we can start to pick up on some of those questions. So I now would like to introduce our final speaker for today, which is Emily Greenspan of Oxfam America. And Emily co-leads Oxfam America's Natural Resource Justice Global Program based in Washington, D.C. And she has worked on natural resource issues for 20 years with a particular focus on land and community rights. And we are delighted to have you with us here today, Emily. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pauline, and what a privilege to follow these really powerful speakers. I wanted to start, if we can just pull up our PowerPoint presentation. I'll talk a little bit about some of the global policy issues that we're looking at in the area of women in mining. One, just as a quick reminder, for those less familiar with the sector in particular, mining continues to be fraught with risks, including gender differentiated impacts. We've heard a bit about these impacts already, but I'll touch a bit more. As Cynthia already talked about, the impacts of pollution on rising unpaid care work for women, but would just flag that women are also impacted as a result of land impacts and resettlement, can have less access to resources like water and firewood. This can also impact their rising unpaid care work. It's already been mentioned, the issue of increased exposure to sexually transmitted infections. And Evelyn so eloquently mentioned the impact on women human rights defenders. We know that human rights defenders in the mining sector, mining is actually the most dangerous sector for human rights defenders. And women experience particular impacts. So, for example, misogynistic attacks, gender-based violence. In Colombia in 2023 alone, over 180 women human rights defenders were killed. So the statistics are quite sobering. We know also that women very often experience fewer benefits. This can be with regard to jobs. So, for example, World Bank research found that in some communities, the percentage of unemployment among women was reportedly as high as 87%, despite job creation in large-scale mining. We also know that very often compensation can go to male heads of household. And there was an interesting also ActionAid study in South Africa that found that a mining affected community in 2018, 73% of women reported receiving no benefit from the mine, while 25% reported increased rates of rape, abuse, and murder, and 85% directly attributed increased rates of violence to the development of the mine. So the promise of mining is clearly not being achieved in many cases, and especially for women. Maxima Acuña is a woman human rights defender in Peru. That's the photo there on the left. And I wanted to talk just a moment about gender-blind consultation processes, which is another huge challenge in the mining sector, where we're seeing women's voices are being excluded in consultations. And if we can go to the next slide, just wanted to give a little snapshot of that. This is from a really interesting study from an Indigenous women's organization in Peru called ONAMIAP from a few years ago. And one interesting thing in Peru, they have a consultation law for Indigenous peoples. So they actually document who participates in consultations around, here we're showing extractive projects. And you can see 30%, the green columns for women's participation in mining as compared to men's in the purple column, similar for hydrocarbons. And then some of the barriers that were identified in particular through interviews were childcare demands, language issues, limited experience with public participation, cultural norms that were discouraging women, and the technical nature of information compounded with education and literacy levels. So these are all barriers that can be addressed as long as that proactive action is taken. And with the next slide, I will just point you to that final column. This is in Peru, the consultation process has various phases. So what I thought was interesting was in the preparation phase at the beginning, when you're talking about what the consultation will look like, we see 31% of women's participation in that light green column on mining. But when you get to the final phase of dialogue, which is actually when decision making is happening and the most important phase, drop off of participation is more than half, which is very concerning. The next slide, please. I won't read through this slide, but of course everyone has access to the slide. I just wanted to flag that Rio Tinto put out a very interesting piece several years back called Why Gender Matters. And it really goes through the business case for why it is important to include women in decision making around mining. And in that first point, one of the very basic questions is, have you included information about men and women, boys and girls in the social baseline, impact, and risk assessment? I know this may sound very obvious, but one of the case studies, which I really appreciated that Rio put in there, was showing where they had failed to do this adequately. So for the Argyle diamond mine in Australia, in their impact assessment, they didn't include enough women, and they failed to identify a sacred site that was sacred only to women and inadvertently damaged that site. And as a result, it generated conflict. They ended up having to renegotiate the agreements. So there's a really strong business case for doing this as well. I thought it was interesting also that the Responsible Mining Foundation's Responsible Mining Index noted that assessing gender impacts was the lowest scoring gender indicator for the companies assessed in 2022. So there are huge gaps here. And if we can go to the next slide, I'll give you another example. This is from Oxfam's 2023 research called Recharging Community Consent, where we looked at around 40 mining companies, and these are mining companies that have the largest production reserves and volumes of reserves of battery minerals. And we looked at their gendered impacts of their operations and their public policy commitments to these issues. What we'd like to see is that green column on the right, gender responsive commitment to free, prior, informed consent as eBleed managed. We're only seeing 2 companies there. The vast majority of companies either have no public policy commitment, those in red, or they may have a commitment that talks about gender equity in the workforce, which is, of course, important, but as eBleed mentioned, falls short. The next slide, please. I'm not going to go into, for lack of time, too much into the gender impact assessment, but there is a guide available that Oxfam has produced. You can see it there. What is a gender impact assessment? It identifies gender differentiated impacts and opportunities, helps to understand the causes of marginalization in the communities, informs the design of the gender responsive consultation process to address some of those issues we've mentioned previously, and also informs decision-making on community development projects and benefit sharing. We can go to the next slide. So some recommendations here on what investors can do, and it's already been mentioned, the great Fair Finance report that came out last year, raising gender issues with mining companies, urging for stronger policies. That includes the gender impact assessments, that includes transparent and gender responsive grievance mechanisms, having an explicit zero tolerance policy towards gender-based discrimination and violence, having inclusive and gender responsive community consultation and free, prior, informed consent, ensuring gender equality in project planning and operations, and I'd reference the UN Guiding Principles guidance on gender dimensions as one useful guide and example, and then urging for stronger gender provisions in voluntary mining standards. And with the next slide, I'm not going to go into all of these standards, but it's just to give you a little snapshot about the proliferation of international mining standards out there. This is not even a fully comprehensive slide. It's just some examples of voluntary standards presently. And as has been previously mentioned, voluntary standards, of course, are not the only solution. We obviously want to see regulation when possible, but it is another tool in the toolkit. And not at the same time, not all mining standards are equal. There are big differences between these standards. And with the last slide, I will just give you a couple of examples. Again, I won't go into details, but we'll give access to the PowerPoint. Oxfam is a member of the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, which we see as the gold standard in terms of voluntary standards. It's a multi-stakeholder initiative that includes participation of companies as well as civil society, communities, investors, purchasers, etc. And they have gender-specific requirements, which are quite detailed with regard to, I've listed here some examples: environmental social impact assessment, FPIC, consultation, resettlement. And I have a link included there where they have a sort of guidance note which goes into detail on a gender for each of those issues. The International Finance Corporation, which is the private sector lending arm of the World Bank, is going through a revision of their performance standards presently, and I would say there's some opportunity there for some considerable improvement in terms of gender language, specifically related to risk assessment, as we've discussed, community consultation, and FPIC. So I'm hopeful this will be the year that IFC standards improve with regard to gender. The Consolidated Mining Standard Initiative is another voluntary standard that's under revision presently. It is an industry-led standard. And while I appreciate that the second draft has included more language on gender than the first draft, it still really falls short of, for example, IRMA's language and provisions and requirements around gender, as well as, frankly, international law, as Evelyn has mentioned, and some key pieces around that even IFC is much stronger on with regard to resettlement, impact assessment, and Indigenous rights. And then finally, would just say the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative is another interesting example of a multi-stakeholder initiative, which includes a number of very specific gender-related disclosures and requirements for participation. Many of these are new in the last few years, so exciting to see some progress there at the EITI. And I've listed there the various provisions so that folks that are interested in digging deep on EITI can see all of the gender references in the standard. And I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Emily. And thank you indeed to all our panelists. This has just been fantastic to hear about the topic from so many different angles and so many different experiences. We have now finished this section where we have had our panelists' input. We have a little bit of time left, however, if there are questions from the floor. So far, I have not seen any questions come into the chat. However, as I say, there's a little bit of time. So if people would like to pose a question, you can either put it in the chat or raise your hand and I will try and come to you. What I would ask is that when you present your question, could you also present yourself and the organization you're representing, should you be representing an organization? I see one hand already, so I'm going to, oh, I'm terribly sorry, I think I'm going to pronounce this quite poorly, but Jainaba Ba, if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question and present yourself, you're welcome to do so.
Yes, hello. So my question was included in the chat, but I probably missed it. Yes, thank you for this great presentation. I recently founded Social Impact Legacy, so I'm the founder and principal consultant. And I had a question related to GIAs, the gender impact assessments. As it stands right now in the industry, are they more conducted as part of SIAs or are they conducted separately? And second question, I know Emily mentioned gender responsive approaches, and I'm wondering overall, is there a move toward more gender transformative approaches? Thank you.
Should I come in on that one on GIAs?
Yes, sure, please.
Thanks for that great question. We'd like to see more of them. I would not say that they are quite the norm yet. We are seeing a lot of, as I mentioned, companies, this is where some companies are falling short in terms of risk assessment. I think, it's great when it's possible to do a standalone gender impact assessment, but as long as gender impacts are effectively integrated in a very, thoughtful and proactive way, that can also be useful. There's one other resource which I forgot to mention, which is the Intergovernmental Forum on Mining did a really interesting global review on integrating gender into mining impact assessments in 2022, and I can put that link in the chat, and that includes some case studies, some very specific case studies, including on Canada, which is the one government which has actually made requirements for gender explicit in their national regulations. We'd love to see more countries doing that. But I will put that in the chat, and I think that can give you a lot more background with regard to your question.
Thank you, Emily.
Okay.
I also see another question in the chat from Andrew in Uganda. Andrew, I don't know if you'd like to pose the question yourself if you're in the room, or if you can go ahead if you're here, or I can read it out. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Pauline. Yeah, I'm Andrew, Uganda. So in Uganda, we are at the stage of developing the Makutu rare earth project by an Austrian company. And at the moment, it has not yet started. They are at the testing stage. So I wonder what would be your advice in terms of tracking the gender impacts of such a project that has not yet started. What should be the basics in terms of setting the ground such that we don't lose on the information or lose on the kind of data that we need at the end of the day? Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I wonder, Emily, is that one for you again? Or would one of the other speakers like also to come in?
I'm happy to come in briefly. I think it's really fortunate that you are early days, because some of the research, including that IGF report I mentioned, flags that you're much more likely to have positive impact if you do this early. There's a really interesting case study specifically on Zambia. That is a project that actually Oxfam has also worked on in that piece. But I think the key is whether it's, even if it's too late to get, gender integrated, if there's already an ESAI that's complete, a separate gender impact assessment can be really valuable doing that early days right now and making sure that you sort of set yourself up for success in the long term.
Thank you, Emily. We are technically out of time. However, if people have a little bit more time and if there's a pressing question or two, we could maybe still just take that quickly. Are there any other questions in the room? If not, then maybe it's time for me to bring this meeting to a conclusion. You can, of course, also, people in the space are very welcome to follow these organizations who've spoken today online on the websites and social media. I want to give a very big thank you very much to all our speakers and participants today. I think we've all learned a great deal and approached the topic from such a variety of angles. And I hope that maybe we can all go forth a little better equipped to think about how we can use our power as individuals, as organizations, as investors to better understand those challenges faced and the needs of people, women, communities impacted by mining. I also wanted to do a little, before I close the event, a little quick mention that this conversation is taking place shortly before International Women's Day, which takes place on Sunday, the 8th of March. And in many of the places we are in, there will be activities to mark the day, which looks at highlighting inequalities women face globally in many aspects of life. So if such an activity, a march or a meeting is happening in your area, please consider going along and adding your voice, calling for greater equality for women. And otherwise, there will be a recording of this webinar publicly available. It will be on the Fair Finance website and on our social media, and I will put those links in the chat in a moment. So those will be available if you would like to come back to this conversation or follow up on any of the points. Please do also, you're very welcome, reach out to us if we can follow up on any questions you still have. And otherwise, once again, a great thank you to our panelists. They've given so much food for thought, and we are so grateful for all the effort they've made to be here, which for many has been quite a considerable effort, and we are very grateful for that. So thank you, and I wish you all a great rest of your day. Thank you very much, Jorge. Yes, indeed. Thanks so much.